Okay, I know I'm not the only one that gets surprised whenever someone uploads a post about AI news or new AI tools, because I go to the actual article and see that it was posted a few hours or minutes ago. And then I think to myself, how do they find out so fast? And I know you probably feel the same way, which is why I created this AI system that scrapes various sources, filters out the best and most relevant information, gets some cool thumbnail images, and then sends you all of this in an email in an aesthetic newsletter. And this newsletter looks something like this, so you have all of the articles right here. You have some reference thumbnails as well, and of course with the respective source URL. So if you click on the title of an article, then it'll redirect you to the actual source. And the best thing about this system is that it's designed to retrieve all of the information from the past 24 hours. So here you can see that this article was published on the 6th of March, which was yesterday, the day I tried this. So if I go to another article right here and click it, then you can see that it was also posted on that same date. So for example, this TikTok was posted 1 day ago, so that's correct. And let's also test out this article right here about DuckDuckGo. And as you can see, it was posted yesterday, which is correct. And now let's actually just test it out real quick so you can see how it works. So in my case, I connected my agent to Telegram. So I'm just gonna ask it, hey, are you there, to see if it's online? And it says that it's here. So now I'm just gonna ask it to give me the latest AI news. And then after a couple of minutes, it'll say that the latest AI news have been sent to your email. And then if I go to my Gmail account and I can see a new email, then here we can see all of the articles in a newsletter format. And this is a pretty great way to stay on top of the AI game. So now without further ado, let's actually start building this AI system and AI agent inside N8N. But first off, if you haven't done so yet, you're invited to join our new Skool community called No Code AI Automators. Here you will get access to all of the AI agents and automations that I create on my YouTube channel, so you can just download and use them straight away. Right now I'm launching an early bird prize for the first members, so if my YouTube channel, myself, and everything I talk about resonates with you, then you're invited to join this new community with the link in the description. And okay, now let's actually get started step by step. So how this works is actually with two automations or two workflows. So first we actually have the agent that's connected to Telegram so we can chat with it. And here you can see that it has a tool called Get Latest News. And this tool is just to call this other workflow called Research Newsletter Tool, which is where all of the magic happens. So let's start by building this AI agent. So first off, just search for AI agent and click on it. So here you can see a trigger called the chat message received and the actual AI agent. In our case, we want to chat with the AI agent via Telegram. So in this case, the trigger will be whenever it receives a message on Telegram. So let's delete this default trigger and then search for Telegram on a new node. Select this Telegram one and then select this on message trigger. So here in the Telegram trigger, you actually have to connect a Telegram bot. So in Telegram, you just have to message this bot called BotFather. I'll be leaving the link to access BotFather in the description. But essentially, this is the way you can create a Telegram bot to connect to your AI agent. So first off, just type in /start and then it'll give you a bunch of options to pick from. In this case, you want to select create a new bot. So type in /new bot. Then you just have to give it a name. Then you have to give it a username, and then it'll finally give you the URL to connect to the bot and an API key to connect it to N8N. So just copy this key right here and then connect this new Telegram account. So click on create new credential and just paste in your API key right here and click on save. So now with your bot connected, then we can just test a step here to listen for any new messages. Oh, but here it says that we have to resolve some issues first. So let's just delete this AI agent temporarily and then click on test a step again. So now it's actually listening. So if I type in a message right here like hello and click on enter, then you can see that it just triggered and it gave all of this information. And the actual text we sent in is right here. So now this trigger is working and let's connect it to the AI agent. So just add a new AI agent and connect it real quick. And right here, the prompt is actually coming from a chat input from the past default trigger that we deleted. And in this case, we wanted to retrieve the user message or the prompt from the Telegram trigger. So for the source of this prompt or user message, let's change it to define below. And here we can simply just drag and drop the text. So now the actual message this agent receives is from Telegram. So now let's just go ahead and choose the chat model for this agent, and in this case I'm gonna select the OpenAI chat model, specifically the GPT-4o mini model. Then for the memory I'm just gonna select the default Windows buffer memory, and here you can see that it gives out this error for the session key. So this session key is actually used so the agent can identify in which chat session all of the messages happened. So for example, if I'm chatting with this Telegram agent, then it'll have a specific session ID. But if someone else messages that same Telegram agent, then they'll have a different session key. So again, this one was connected to the default trigger node, so let's just change it to define below. And then let's just drag and drop this chat ID, which is basically the same thing. And then for the context window length is basically how many interactions the model will have in its memory. And then before we actually start setting up this workflow tool, let's first off set up the output for this AI agent. So whenever it receives a message, it also has to send it somewhere. And in this case, it'll send it to the same chat in Telegram. So just add a node here, search for Telegram, and select this send a text message node. Then here it will simply ask for the chat ID like we just discussed, and the text that the agent receives so it can actually reply. So to mapping this data, so the chat ID came in from Telegram, so here let's select the Telegram trigger and drag and drop the chat ID once again. And then for the actual text that the AI agent responds, this comes from the AI agent, of course. And right here we didn't trigger it yet, so let's just execute the previous nodes. And as you can see, this agent just ran, and here we can see that it responded as hello, how can I assist you today? So this was the response from the original message that we told, which was hello. So let's just drag and drop this output into the text right here. And then let's test this step to see if it actually responds. So boom, you can see here that it replied. And you can see that it was the exact message that came in from the AI agent. And to disable this annoying message, then you can simply just go to add a field, select append N8N attribution, and disable this option, which is basically the text watermark that came in right here. And okay, that was basically everything up to now for this AI agent. And before we continue, we actually need to create the workflow tool that will do all of the hard work. So just create a new workflow, and here is where we will build the actual tool. So as a trigger, let's just simply select this trigger manually node. And here, if we check out our template, we have the research TikTok, research Reddit, Perplexity, and testingcatalog.com. So let's first off start with the research TikTok part. So here we're going to use a very important API that can scrape the latest TikTok videos from specific creators within the last 24 hours. For this, we actually have to go to Apify first, and you have to create your free account. And if you don't know what Apify is, it's basically a marketplace where you can search for a bunch of APIs to scrape, for example, Google Maps, to scrape Instagram posts, to scrape real estate properties, and so much more. So in this case, we're going to use this one called the TikTok Data Extractor. And this does have a price of $4 per 1,000 results. And given that Apify actually gives you $5 worth of credits each month, then you can basically build these scraping bits all for free. But anyways, in this case, we're going to filter by profiles. So here I selected the best TikTok creators regarding AI news and AI tools, which are these 4. And by the way, huge shout out if you're watching my video right now. But essentially here you can select any creator that you want depending on whatever topic you want to research about. And then here in the profile sections to scrape, you just have to select the videos because we don't want to scrape the reposts. And then to actually filter from the past 24 hours, then here you have to put in a specific date in the newer than section and older than section. So the 4th of March is just set up here as an example. And then just enable this exclude pinned post just in case. Okay, so now that you have all of your filters ready, then you can actually just click on start to test it out. And then after a couple of seconds, then you'll have a list of all of the videos within those specific filters. And now you might be asking, okay, we scraped these videos, but how do we use it inside N8N? So back here in N8N, if we actually add a new node and search for Apify to connect it, we don't actually have an Apify node just yet. So in this case, we would actually need to use a HTTP request, which you can think of as a universal way to connect to APIs. So in this HTTP request node, we actually need to fill in a couple of details. And of course, we have to get all of these details from the API that we'll be using. So to do that, you just go to integrations, Then scroll down a bit and use API endpoints, and then use this API endpoint called run actor synchronously and get dataset items. So here you can see that it tells us to set it as post. So in N8N, let's just change the method to post, and then we can just copy this whole URL right here and paste it into our URL section right here. And then that would pretty much be it for this node. And if you're wondering where the API key goes, well, it basically just goes here in the URL. But now as a last step, we actually have to send a body. So in this body is all of the information that we want to send to this API. So here in your Appify actor, you just have to change from this manual toggle to this JSON toggle, and then you'll see a perfect copy of all of the settings you set up, but now in JSON format. So this is what the API can actually read. So let's just copy this, go back to N8N and set the specific body as using JSON. And then here we can just paste in all of this JSON. And if we take a closer look, then all of the filters that we set up are right here. So the newest post date, the oldest post date, the profiles, and so on. So now the only thing we have to change are these date filters, because we only want the videos from the past 24 hours or from today. So let's just delete these dates and this one right here. And here we actually have to map in dynamic expressions, so it always updates to today's date. So change this JSON from fixed to expression, and then to select the actual expression that will give us today's date, then we can simply select this one called today. And if you check the output, then you can see that this expression is correct. But there's an issue. Here you can see that the date is weirdly formatted, and the Appify actor actually requires this format of year, month, and date. So for that, we can just add a simple format function. So just type in dot format, and between parentheses we can type in our preferred format, which in this case is year, month, and date. And if we see the output, then it's now correctly formatted. So then we can just copy and paste this expression to the other filter, and then that would be all for this HTTP request node. So now you can also just rename it into a better name, and now let's actually test it out. And then here you'll see all of the information about the videos that have been posted, but here we're just interested in the video URL to download the video to get the transcript, as well as to link to this source in the newsletter. And we're also interested in this text, which is the description, so we can have a little bit more of information. So now let's just move on to actually downloading these videos to get the transcript with the OpenAI API Whisper. So here, as you can see, it outputted 5 items. In this case, one creator posted 2 times today and the rest did not post anything. So that's why it says 5 items. So now we actually have to make a list of all of the available video URLs to download. So in this case, we'll use an if or else filter node. So search for if and select this node right here. You can basically read it like this. If value is equal to another value, then it's okay. And you can change these operators to anything you want. For example, for a number and greater than. So if this number is greater than this other number, then it will go to this true flow, and if not, it'll go to this false flow. So in this case, we simply want to check if a video URL actually exists. So let's drag and drop video URL right here, and then change the operator to string, because the actual video URL that will come in is in a string format. So string basically means text. So let's change it to string and to exists. So now it will simply check if a video URL actually exists. So if it does, then we have to download it, and if it doesn't, then we can just simply ignore it. So for this false flow, we can actually select this do nothing node that actually does nothing. So let's just connect it right here, and that'll be it for this false flow. And then for this true false, we'll actually use another API to download the video, because it's not possible to just download it with the TikTok URL. So to get the actual download URL, we have to use this Appify actor called Fast TikTok Downloader. So it's super simple. You just input a URL, and then when you run it, after a couple of seconds, it'll give you the actual download URL for the video. And with this URL, we can now finally download it inside N8N. So for that, let's just add another HTTP request node. Then in your Appify actor, you just again go to integrations, use API endpoints, use this one and copy this endpoint, paste it into the URL section right here, and then change the method to, in this case, it was post. So let's set the method as post, and then for the actual data that we'll send, we just have to switch this to JSON and copy this JSON body. Then back in N8N, let's just enable send body and specify body, set it as using JSON, and then paste the actual JSON. And then here again, we want this value to be dynamic depending on whatever video URL came in from the last node. And let's delete this URL. And then to map it, let's just execute the previous nodes. So now we have all of the data. And then here you can see that we only have 2 items, which are the 2 available videos that have been posted today. So now let's simply search for the web video URL and map it right here. So if we take a closer look, then here you can see that this expression maps correctly to the actual URL. But anyways, now let's actually rename this node to get download URL and then click on test this step. And after a couple of seconds, you can see that it got the video download URL for each of the videos that came in. And now that we have the download URLs, then we can actually download the video using a HTTP request. So just add a HTTP request right here. And in this case, you don't need any API. You can just put the method as get and then the download URL in this URL section right here, and that would be it. So from your previous node, let's just drag and drop this video URL right here. So let's test it out to see what happens. And then here you can see the downloaded video for the first TikTok and the second TikTok. And this is a different type of data called binary. So this file is actually downloaded in your N8N instance. And if the file size is too big, then it may lag your system. But anyways, one curious thing about this is that in my previous tests, just putting in the URL here and downloading it wasn't enough because sometimes it failed. I know that in this case it successfully worked, but I'm still gonna teach you how to put in some settings here so that most of the times this actually works. I'm not saying that this execution was lucky, but maybe it was a bit. So first off, let's just enable send headers. And for these parameters, you just put in user agent right here. And for these parameters, you just put in user agent right here. And as its value, this Mozilla code. Then in options, click on add options and select redirects, and make sure follow redirects is on and the max redirects is set as 21. And then add another option called response, and then turn include response headers and status on, and in response format set it as file. And then here in the output field, just put in an identifier for this video, which in this case will just use the video URL. And then that's it. Now if we test the step, then you can see that it successfully downloaded both of the videos. So in my opinion, it doesn't hurt to put in these options. And if you're wondering what these do, then to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I just asked ChatGPT and it just told me to put in these options. But moving on, let's just change the name of this node to download video. But to make sure this always downloads, then we can actually add a little delay between each run, each download, so that it gets more consistent, successful downloads. So for this, we can use a loop. So we just disconnect this download video and add this loop over items is split in batches node. So here just set the batch size as 1 because we want 1 item per run. So for your actual node that you'll be using, you just have to replace it with this replace me node. So just delete this and connect your actual node to it and the output of this node back to this loop over items node. And this process would go something like this. So first off, from this pause node, we actually get the download URL of each of the videos. And in this case, there were 2 items. So these 2 items come into this node right here. So then it simply loops as many times as there were items. So the first item would pass through this loop over items node. Then it would actually be downloaded and then it would go back here. Then it'll be put on hold and then the second item will come in and do this whole loop once again. And once all of the items have been in this loop, have been in this process, then they would be outputted to this done flow right here. So now I'm actually gonna run this whole loop so you can see what I'm talking about. So here we can just run these nodes individually, but since it's a loop, we actually have to run this one first, then this one, and then again this one for the second item and this one. And imagine you have hundreds of items, so this way of testing these loop nodes would not be ideal. So here it would actually be better to just run this entire workflow so it can automatically process these nodes. But we have another problem right here. This node and this node actually cost, and it could get very expensive whenever you want to test something and you have to run those costly APIs. And this is exactly where pinning data comes in. So since we only want to run this loop process, then we only need the data that comes in from this last node. So if you go inside it and click on pin data, which is right here. And then the output of this node will always be this pinned data. So you can use this as dummy information to test out the next nodes. So now we can simply just connect the trigger directly to this node and click on test workflow. And boom, it just runs just like it would with the default workflow, but now we're going directly into action without running any previous nodes. And here you can see the actual process if we click on this download video node. So on the first run right here, we can see the first downloaded video. And in the second run, we can see this second downloaded video. So that's basically how looping works. But in this case, we also want to add something before this node, which is to wait like 5 seconds. So let's add the waits node and put it right here and connect it to the loop cycle before the download video node. And here for the wait amount, we can just leave it as 5 seconds because that's an ideal number. And if we test this workflow once again, then you can see that it's running for this loop. It's waiting 5 seconds. Then it goes to the downloaded video. Then it goes through this whole loop again and it waits 5 seconds. And it goes to the downloaded video. It goes all the way back here. And we have these two items as an output. And yeah, that was how looping works. And now that we have these two downloaded videos, then we can get their transcripts using the OpenAI Whisper API. So next, just add an OpenAI node. And then in the audio actions, you have to select transcribe a recording. And then once inside, you actually have to connect your OpenAI API key. So for this, it's pretty easy to do. You just create your OpenAI account. And then you go to this link to actually set up your billing details and set up your API key. Because yes, OpenAI API is actually cost. But if we check its pricing, then we can see that it's very, very cheap. So here we're just using the Whisper model and it costs I'm not even sure how to read this out, but it's $0.006 per minute. So I recommend you to purchase $5 worth of credits and this will get you a pretty long way. So once you have bought in your credits by clicking in this button right here, then here on the left you just go to API keys and on the top right you can just create your new secret key. So once you have it, you can just copy it somewhere safe. And then in N8N you can just create a new credential and paste in your API key right here. Okay, so now we actually have to map in the binary data of the downloaded videos in this input data field name. So in this case, it would be these names right here, but we can't really just drag and drop it because I don't know why, but N8N doesn't let us do that. So in this case, since we set the names as that actual download URL, then we can just go to this get download URL node and drag and drop the actual download URLs from here. So since we have the same name, then we're basically mapping the same data. And I know it says error right here, but if you just click on test a step, then after a couple of seconds, you'll get the transcripts of both of the videos. Okay, and now we actually have everything we need for this TikTok research list. So the actual content, so the description of the video and the transcript and the URL of the source, which is the TikTok URL. So now let's actually compile all of this information into a neat list. So for this, just add the edit fields node, the first one which will be the content and the second one which will be the URL. So now for the content, we want it to be a dynamic expression. So let's change this to expression. And let's put in the text right here. And then for the URL, we have to map in the TikTok URL. But in this case, remember that we actually disconnected this node that got the TikTok URL from our workflow. And we didn't pin it, so we can't map in that data from it. So in this case, we would have to run this node again. So I'm actually just gonna unpin this right here. And I'm gonna run everything from the start so we can have clean pinning data. So delete everything and then test workflow. And okay, everything just ran, so now we have the data available. So in the edit fields node, we can now map the TikTok URL. So let's search for the actual TikTok URL, which is in the scrape TikTok profiles. And it's right here where it says web video URL. And then actually for this content, I also want the video description apart from the transcript. So I'm just gonna format this as video description, and then I'm gonna map the actual description of the video, which is this expression, and then I'm gonna format the next one as video transcript. So now this whole content field will look something like this. So now let's test this again to see the final correct fields. And now you can see the scraped TikTok videos into this neat format right here with the contents and the source URL. So now let's just pin this for later, change its name to TikTok list, and this would be it for our whole TikTok workflow. Okay, and now that we have pinned this data right here, then this will never go away. So we can just disconnect this flow right here so we can just focus on the Reddit one. So in this case, we're going to use this Appify actor called Reddit Scraper Lite to scrape its search function, filtering by certain keyword and by date. So for these settings, you can just enable skip comments, put in your search term right here. In my case, it's AI tools. Then enable only to search for posts and to filter by the top post of the last day. So now if I quickly run this, then here in the output, you'll be able to see all of the Reddit posts that have been scraped. So again, to use this inside N8N, then you just go to integrations, use API endpoints, select this run actor synchronously, and copy the URL. And in N8N, we can just add a HTTP request node, change the method to, in this case, post, and paste in the URL right here. Then of course, enable send body and enable using JSON. And then here to actually get the JSON instructions, then just switch this to JSON and then just copy this whole thing. And here, if we take a closer look, then we can see that all of our filters are right here, like our search terms and to sort from the top of today. Then if I quickly test this step, after a couple of seconds, you'll be able to see this list of all of the scraped Reddit posts. And here, unlike the previous scraping API, all of the data comes in neatly organized and with everything we need. So we can simply just set up our list from this information. So just change the name of this node to research Reddit, and then here, search for the edit fields node. So now let's add the content field and the URL field. So just type in content right here, then add another field and type in URL. Make sure that these have the same names as the TikTok list, because when we merge them, then the merge node requires us to have the same name for each field. Because yes, after researching all of these platforms, we'll actually create a big list to compile all of them neatly. But back on track, here on the URL, we can just map in this URL right here. And for the content, you have to keep in mind that Reddit posts have a title and a body. So in this case, I'm gonna change this to expression and then type in title and map in the title right here. And then I'm gonna type in body for the body of the Reddit post and map it right here. So if we take a closer look, then it'll look something like this. So let's just test the step, and here we can see the whole Reddit post scraping list organized by content and URL. And now we can actually just put this Reddit list next to this TikTok list for organization. And of course, pin the data because we'll use it later. Okay, so now moving on, after we scrape TikTok and Reddit, then in this flow, we'll basically scrape the whole internet using the Perplexity API. And if you don't know what Perplexity is, well, it's basically an AI search engine, so whatever you chat with it will actually be data from the internet. And this is great because we can ask it to give us the most relevant information about a specific topic from the last 24 hours. And this would pretty much give us the news from a bunch of articles, blog posts, etc. And the way we can use Perplexity inside N8N, then if we check out their documentation, then here we can see all of the models that they have and their pricing. So in our situation, we're going to use the Sonar Pro model, and it costs $3 per million input tokens, $15 per million output tokens, and $5 every 1,000 searches. So these input tokens actually refer to the prompt, and the million tokens is around 750 words, and the output tokens refer to the actual response that the model will give. And each of these searches actually refer to the actual web browsing that it does. So if we go back to Perplexity and create an account, then go to the settings and select API here in the top right, and then here you can start off by buying some credits. In my case, I bought $5 worth of credits, and again, this can get you very far. And once you have those credits, then you can just generate your API key right here. So then back in N8N, if we actually search for that Perplexity node, then you can see that it doesn't exist. So in this case, again, you can simply just use the HTTP request. And the way you actually set all of this up is actually in that Perplexity documentation. So here you'll be able to see an example API call. So we can just copy and paste each of these properties into the HTTP request. For example, this URL is the URL in the request. These are all of the 3 headers that we have to put in, and this is the actual body. So let's copy the URL right here. Then in N8N you just paste it in. And in this case, it doesn't specifically mention that it's a post request, but it is. So just put in a post request right here. Then for the headers, we have to add 3 headers. So add a parameter and add a parameter again. And then just copy the headers. For example, here it says accept and then application/JSON. So in N8N, you just put in accept right here in this box. And then in the value, you just put in the actual value, which is application/JSON. Then do that for the rest of the parameters, and then here you actually have to put in your API key. So in your API settings back in Perplexity, just copy it and paste it right here. And then the last step here would be to actually enable send body and then set it as using JSON. And then we can just copy everything between these curly brackets, which is the data, and paste it right here. And if we take a closer look, then here we can see that it's using the Sonar Pro model. And here we can see that its system prompt is be precise and concise. And the user prompt in this case was set up as how many stars are there in our galaxy. And here for our prompt to pick out the best AI news, I just created this one right here that specifies the topic and that it should be from the last 24 hours. So Perplexity already knows today's date, but I just give it this expression just in case. And before we continue, let's just change this to expression so it counts that in. So just change the toggle here. And then you can see that it's now valid. But after that, I just give it a few more instructions so that it can be precise. And then I tell it to actually include the citation URLs for each of the news. And this is very important because later on we'll use GPT-4o Mini to actually separate all of the news items into an actual list that N8N can read. So for the citation URLs to actually match the news item, then they have to be in this little same paragraph. And of course, if you want to add any other parameter like the temperature or the max amount of tokens to consume, you can just further check their documentation and just plug it inside this JSON. So now that's everything for this node setup, and I just changed this name to Perplexity and let's just test it out. And after a few seconds we get this super detailed response. So here in choices and in content we can see the actual reply. So it puts in the actual news article and the source URL. And this is exactly what we want. So up next, to just separate these news articles into a structured list, we're gonna use the GPT-4o Mini model to do that. So just search for OpenAI, then select the message model, and here just select GPT-4o Mini. And then for this first prompt, let's change it to system prompt. And we're simply gonna tell it to split this whole content into a structured list. And we're gonna do this with a JSON format. So I'm just telling it to output it as JSON format and to only keep the news articles and the respective citation URLs. And this is very important. You have to give it an example output. In this case, this JSON could also render as this table right here. So for a key, we have a value, and for another key, we have other values. And this is what happens here. For a key, we have a value, and for another key, we have another value. And this for as many times as there are news articles. So now let's actually map in the content. So add a message to select the user prompt and just map in this content right here. So if we make this bigger, then you see that this expression translates into the whole content that it replied. And before we can test this out, you have to enable output content as JSON, because this will not be a simple response, it'll be a JSON response. So enable that and click on test step. And then boom, now we have all of the news articles neatly structured into this list. So the first one has the news and the citation. The second one has the news and the citation, and so on until the last one. And now to order this into a neat table like we had before, then we can just use that set fields node. So let's add a set fields node. So search for set fields. Then here, like always, let's add our content field and let's add our URL field. And now to actually structure all of this in a neat table, we first have to separate these items. Because if you see here, all of this is just one single item. But we want all of the news articles with their respective URL to be in a different item. So each can be processed independently. So for that, we can just add a split node right here. So just search for the split out. And then we have to select the field to split. In this case, it's called the news articles right here. So just map it into this box and then click on test step. And you can see that everything is now in a neat table. So now to actually create this list, remember that it has to be named content and URL so it later on can actually be all merged in. And here in our split news articles node, we have it as news and citation. So to do that, we can just set up an edit fields node. So select edit fields. And here, like always, let's add our content field and let's add our URL field. And for the content, we just map in the content from the news article, and for the URL, we can just map in this citation. Then if we click on next step, it would basically be the same thing, but now with different names. So now I'm just gonna name it Perplexity list, and I'm gonna pin this information so later on we can actually use it. Okay, and now that we have TikTok research, Reddit research, and Perplexity or general browsing research. So now we're left to research this specific website called Testing Catalog. And this is just a really great blog for everything related to this space, and they update their news articles every single day. So this is a perfect add-on for our research. And to actually scrape everything here in this website, we're gonna use the Gina Reader API. This is a free API in which you don't even need to have an API key. You just have to put in a URL and it'll convert everything into an LLM friendly format. So if we copy testingcatalog.com and put it right here and then fetch content, then here you can see the comparison between the raw HTML that we could have gotten with a HTTP request. But here with this API, then everything is formatted neatly into a structured LLM-friendly text. So you can see the date of a news, the actual URL of the news, and the title and descriptions. Then back in N8N, Gina doesn't actually have a native node here, so we can just use the HTTP request. And here, just so you can see the live comparison, we can also scrape websites just with this get method and putting the website URL right here. So if we test step, then here you can see that pretty much it scraped everything, but it's in this not so friendly HTML format. So to actually use the Gina Reader API, you just have to put their URL behind your URL that you want to scrape. So just paste it in, and it's this one right here. So now if I click on test a step again, then you'll see that everything is in an LLM friendly format. And now you can change the name of this node to scrape website. And here we actually need all of the news from today. So again, we'll use GPT-4o Mini to read all of that website and only extract the news from the past 24 hours. So we can just copy this node right here because it also used GPT-4o Mini, so duplicate it. And here let's just delete our prompt from before and change it with this prompt right here. And it basically says to read this data and to only extract the articles from today and to also save it into a JSON list like the format that we used before. So here I'm actually using an expression to get today's date, so I'm just going to change this to expression. And then for this user prompt, I'm going to delete everything. And since I told it that it'll receive some scraped data, I'm just going to type in scraped data right here. Then change this to expression, and I'm just going to drag and drop right here. And if we take a closer look, then you can see what the AI model will actually read. And now that you have all of these prompts, then just make sure that this output content as JSON is turned on and you can test a step. And now it replied with 2 news articles. So if we go back to testingcatalog.com, we can see that there was only 2 news from today, which is 7th of March. So here we can see March 7 about DuckDuckGo, and March 7 about World Launches World Chat. And then the rest are from previous days. So there we can verify that these news articles are actually from today. And now to actually put these articles into a structured table list, and then again, we'll use the split out node. So we can just duplicate this one as well, plug it right here. Let's just rename it to split articles, and inside we just have to delete this field and replace it with this new one, which is just called articles. And let's quickly test it out. Then boom, everything in a nice format. So next off, to create the list, we can just search for the edit fields node, add our content field right here, add our URL field right here, and we can simply just drag and drop it and drag and drop it. And if we test it out, then it's the same table, but now with different keys. So to finalize this research section, we can just pin this data and change the name. In my case, I'm just naming it to testing catalog list. Okay, and so now that we finished all of this research, then we can continue into the filtering. So we'll pretty much use GPT-4o to select the absolute best news from this list. And let's start off by merging these articles. So just add a node and search for merge. And for the number of inputs, we have 4 inputs, so we can just put it as 4. And then we can connect each list to each input. And now that it's all connected, just make sure that the mode is set as append and you can test a step. Oh, and it looks like everything did not go as expected. So here in the second run, we only have the articles from testing catalog. And in the first run, we only have the ones from TikTok. So in cases like these, I found out that running the whole workflow actually fixes that. So lucky for us, we have pinned data, so we can just delete all of these connections to these previous nodes and connect our triggers to those pinned data nodes that are the only ones that we need right now. So just connect all of this up and then delete all of the data and test workflow. And boom, now you can see that all of these items have just been appended into this huge list. And you can verify it right here. So 2 plus 10 plus 7 plus 2 equals 21. And now let's just add an OpenAI node to select the GPT-4o model, so message a model. And here select GPT-4o. It can also be GPT-4o mini, but whenever you have a pretty big list of inputs, I just try to be safe with a top model, so I'm just gonna pick GPT-4o. But here, let's just put in the system prompt, so change the role to system. And I'm gonna paste in my prompt that I prepared beforehand. And so we can take a closer look, then I'll just go into expression and open this up. The first part of this prompt is actually some criteria on what articles to actually choose. Then this part is to provide a justification for their decision. And then this part is to specify the output format. So again, to make the list that we saw before, we'll use this JSON right here. So we'll have verify keys where the values can be yes or no. And we'll also have explanation keys where the value will be the actual justification. So next, let's add the user prompt. So I'm just gonna put it as news article, and then I'm just gonna map the actual article right here. So drag and drop the content. And since we instructed it to output as JSON, remember to enable this output content as JSON and click on test step. Alright, and this does take a little bit more of time since we're using a bigger model, but as you can see, for each news article it provided the verification if yes or no and its explanation. So now you can review this whole list and check out if this prompt is actually good for you, because it also explains why it selected yes or no. And now we'll actually filter out all of the news articles that were verified as no. So before this, we'll actually put these verify and explanations into a neat table format like we always do. So you can change your OpenAI node to verify articles right here. And next we have to select the set fields node. I mean the edit fields node. So just select this. And in this case, we're gonna select 4 fields, one for the article, one for the URL, one for the verification, and one for the explanation. So just add all of the fields right here, and then mapping the verify value to the verify field and the explanation value to the explanation field. And then for the article and the URL, this actually comes in from the merge node, which is actually the full list. So just mapping the content into the article field and the URL into the URL field. And if we click on test the step, then you can see that everything is now formatted correctly. So each article has the URL, the verification, and the explanation. And now to delete all of these articles that are verified as no, we have to use the filter node. So here's search for filter and select this filter node right here. And here we have to put in a condition in which we will keep the articles. So map in the verify field right here. And for the operator, we can set it as a string and is equal to. And let's put it as yes. So now we'll only keep the ones verified as yes. So that's capital Y, capital E, and capital S. So now let's test it out to see if this is true. So boom, all of the articles are verified as yes. And in this case, it says that we only kept 7 items. Okay, so now we just finished the research to get the list of news articles. And here we just did the filtration to get the best ones. So now one of the last steps is to get the images for these thumbnails right here and to create this whole newsletter. So for the thumbnail images, we'll actually use a free API from a service called Pexels. It basically provides high quality royalty-free images. So to access the API, you just go to pexels.com, create your account, and then in these 3 dots you select images and video API. So here in your case, you'll see a button called get your API key, so you just click here. And it's pretty much just to answer a quick little survey. So once you do that, you'll get your API key. So back in N8N, before we actually proceed, let's just pin this data right here so we don't have to run anything from before. And here, if we search for the Pexels node, then you can see that it doesn't exist. So again, in this case, we can simply use the HTTP request node. And to fill in all of this information, we can just go to the Pexels documentation, select the search for photos endpoint. So here we can see that it's a GET request and that we have to use this URL right here. And the actual parameters that we'll put in, like the query, will actually go with this URL. So if we check out this example request, then we can see that it searches for nature and that it only gets one result per page. So this is pretty much everything we need because we just need one result and one query. So let's just copy this URL back into N8N and put it right here. We can leave the method as get, but the thing that always has to change is this query. So let's change this URL to expression. And in this case, we have to delete this nature query and we'll put in our expression right here. In this case, we don't really have any values to use as a query. So for this, let's just use an OpenAI node to create that query. So disconnect this HTTP request and add an OpenAI node, specifically a message model, and select GPT-4o mini. Then here for the prompt, let's set up the system prompt. So change this to system and paste in your prompt right here. In this case, I just instructed it to read the news article and to create a keyword for a thumbnail. And I also just told it to never include AI or artificial intelligence as a keyword because all of the articles talk about that and I don't want any repeat thumbnails. And then for the user prompt, we'll just map in the article. So I'm just gonna put in article and then change this to expression and drag this article right here. In this case, we just want a simple word, which is the keyword, so we don't have to output content as JSON. But one thing we can do so it actually listens to our prompts better is to lower the temperature. So here you can go to add option, then select output randomness, which is the temperature, and pick a number close to 0.5. So in my case, I'm gonna choose 0.6. So this number actually represents the randomness, so whenever it's more close to 0, it'll get less random results, and if you select a number close to number 1, then it'll be more creative. So now let's just click on test a step, and boom, now we can see that it selected a keyword for each of these news articles. So for example, this third one has healthcare, and if we go to the third news right here, then you can see that Google Cloud expands generative AI capabilities for healthcare. So this did a great job, and now we can connect these keywords to the Pexels API. So just connect this to the HTTP request. And for the query, which is after this equal sign, we can just drag and drop this content, which is the keyword. And now it'll appropriately search for an image for each of the news articles. So as a last step here, we can just add in this header called authorization where we will put in the API key. So let's just copy all of this. And in N8N, we just enabled send headers. Then we can paste in the value right here and we can just separate all of this, which we don't need. And the API key actually goes in the value. So copy your API key from Pexels and paste it right here. And now if we click on test as step, then you will see that for each of the 7 items, it'll provide an image URL. So here is one image URL as well as some other formats. And then for the next item, again, we have another image URL with other formats and so on. Okay, so now from our previous list that had all of the URLs, the articles, the verifications, and the explanations, then here we can just add another column for the image URL. So just add another edit fields node. And actually in this case, since we're going to feed this list to another model to actually create the newsletter, let's just pick out the article URL, and the image URL. So for the image URL, I'm just going to map in the landscape version of this image. So if we go and check it out in our browser, then here you can see that it pretty much just gives us the cropped horizontal version, and that's exactly what we need for these thumbnails. So let's drag in this landscape field into the image URL, and then for the source URL and article, we can get this from a previous node. In this case, it was the filter node, and just drag and drop the article field and the URL field. So now if we test this node up, we can see that this table is neatly formatted. Okay, and now that we have our final list with articles, source URLs, and image URLs, then we will feed all of this into GPT-4o to create the actual newsletter with HTML. So right now, all of these news articles are in separate items, and for GPT-4o to read it in one go, we actually have to put it into one item. So for this, we can just use an aggregate node, so search for aggregate. And here we want to aggregate everything, so here just change the option to all item data into a single list. And here we can select the name of the output. So in this case, it'll be list for HTML. So now we can run this and everything will be in this neat list. Okay, so now let's just pin this data so we don't lose it. And here let's add an OpenAI node to select the GPT-4o model. So pick the Messenger model one, then here pick GPT-4o. Again, this can be any model you want, but in my case, I want to be extra safe because we'll be processing a lot of data. And for this, I consider using a robust model. And here for the system prompt, let's just put in all of the instructions that we wanted to use. So select system. And here, I'm just gonna paste in my prepared prompt. So first, I just tell it that it's a professional at creating HTML newsletters and that it'll receive a list of articles with their description, the thumbnail image URL, and the source URL. So the task for this model is to generate a well-formatted HTML email newsletter based on that content. And here, before we actually get into the instructions, right below it, you can see that there's this HTML code for the newsletter. And you might be saying, oh, this is a tutorial for no code. Why is this using code? Well, this HTML is actually the design I used for this newsletter right here, and it was made completely with ChatGPT. So you can just give it an example for an existing newsletter, but in my case, I just quickly sketched out this newsletter format. Then I just uploaded that image to ChatGPT and told it to create a HTML for this sketch for my newsletter. And then it'll give you the complete HTML code that you can just copy. And if you just go to this website right here, then you can quickly preview it. So just delete everything and paste in that code. And as you can see, it created this newsletter right here. And right now it's looking a little empty, but that's because there's no images. And of course, if you want to make any changes, then you can just ask ChatGPT to make it more skinny, to make the title bigger, to make the article list more in the middle, and so on. So in my case, after a few tweaks, this is what I got from ChatGPT, and this is the one that I used on my demo. And here you can see that I have a banner image, a title, a profile image, a author name, and a list with the article image and the subtitle and description. So then for GPT-4o and N8N, I just copy all of the code that ChatGPT gave and paste it right here. And then once you have that HTML code that it'll read, then you can just put in the instructions. So I set one instruction per each element on the HTML newsletter. For example, the title for each article should be bold and clickable, the profile image should be this one, the author name should be this one, to use the thumbnail images provided, and so on. So now that we have the system prompt ready, then we can just put in the user prompt. And in this case, we can just drag and drop this list for HTML field. And then you can see that the whole list is right here. So now just click on test step. So here it's telling us that it's missing a required parameter called messages content type. And this usually means that there isn't any prompt, but I did put a prompt right here, which is very weird. And this could be because we're using the actual expression which contains this array or JSON. So to make it more readable for the model, we can transform this into a string or a text. So for this, you just put in json.stringify and then put in your original expression. And if right below here we put in the actual list for HTML field that we had before and take a closer look, then you can see that in the top we have all of the articles neatly organized, and in the bottom we have object, 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 which came in from this original one that we used. So I'm not exactly sure why this could be happening, but I think it's a bug. So now let's delete this and test is step. And then here you can see that it replied with the actual HTML code neatly formatted. So now everything is correct with this HTML node, including these escapes, because this will actually make it work when we execute the code. But the thing we do not want are these three little things. And they're at the start and at the bottom. So to remove these elements from our HTML code, we can use another AI model to do that. But I think that's overkill, and we can also do this with a simple code node. So just add a code node right here, search for code and add it. And here it actually uses the programming language called JavaScript. So I'm just going to put in the JavaScript code I prepared that removes all of those elements that we do not want. And this includes the starting triple backticks and the ending triple backticks. The only thing you have to change here is delete this input to whatever input you might have, because maybe it's different for you, and just map it in. And again, I know this is a node code tutorial, but this exact code was made by ChatGPT, and for these little things like formatting or ordering data, then these code nodes actually come in clutch. So in ChatGPT, you can just go to this N8N Assistant GPT, and here just tell it what you want the code to do. So in my case, I just told it that I have a HTML code in a field, and that I want to remove those backtick things at the start and at the end, and all of this for the code node. So now it'll simply give you some JavaScript code that you can paste, and of course it'll also give you the instructions on how to use it. So now if we click on test step, then now we can see that those 3 little backticks at the start and at the end are now gone. So now that we have all of this ready, then we can just send it via Gmail. So just add a Gmail node right here, search for Gmail, and here just select the one called send a message. So first, of course, you have to connect your Gmail account, and this is a pretty long process, so I'll just leave a tutorial in the description. But anyways, here make sure that the resource is set as message, that the operation is set as send, then type in the receiver email, and for the subject, I'm just gonna put it as test123. Then for the email type, we could have it as text or HTML. In our case, we want it as HTML to render it out in that graphic format. And then for the message, we just change this to expression and map in this whole HTML. Then as a quick bonus, we can add an option to remove that N8N watermark. So just select append N8N attribution and turn this off. And then if we click on test a step, then you can see that it successfully sent it. So now if I go back to my inbox, I can see test123. And then inside we can see the newsletter with all of the latest AI news that we just researched. So the specific banner we selected in the prompt is right here. My profile image is right here. The author is correct. If we click on a news, we can see that it directs us to the actual source URL. And we have successfully created this AI system. But now to actually connect this whole workflow tool to our AI agent, then we have to add some few extra things. First off, here in the Gmail node, you can see that it has outputted one item. And this item just has some ID, some thread ID, and some label. So whenever an agent actually runs a whole workflow tool, it'll read the output from the last node. So in this case, it'll just read this whole thing and it'll probably be confused because it doesn't know what this means. So in the last node, we actually want the output to be the whole list of articles. So now whenever the agent runs this whole workflow, then it will see all of the articles in that output and then it can just messages to us via Telegram. But since in this case, we're already sending that information via Gmail, then we don't actually want the agents to be sending us the news articles via Telegram. So for this, we can just add an edit fields node, then add a field called notification, and we can just set up this message up that says the latest AI news have been sent to the user's email. So if we simply test this one out, then this is the exact output that the AI agent will read. And it'll just be telling the agent that everything went successful, and that's what it will tell us via Telegram. So now this would pretty much be it for this workflow tool. So now let's actually just connect everything appropriately. And now that everything is set up correctly, then we can just go back to our AI agent and then click on this plus sign to add a tool and select the call N8N workflow tool because we'll be calling a workflow to use as a tool. So here I'm just gonna name it get latest AI news. Then for the description, I'm just gonna set it as call this tool to get the latest AI news. And that when this workflow tool is finished, it means that the AI news have been sent to the user's email. And now we actually have to select the workflow to connect to this tool. So here in the workflow dropdown, you just have to select the name of the workflow that you have the tool in. In my case, it's called live build tool. And then for the actual workflow, instead of setting this when click and test workflow trigger, you actually have to select this one called execute sub workflow. And this is basically the trigger that gets executed by other workflows or agents. So just click here and select the triggers, and specifically the one when executed by another workflow. And then here it's asking us to put in some input fields that will come in from the AI agent. But in this case, we don't actually need any of these unless you want your agent to be more dynamic. For example, if you wanted to pick out the date of the news, the topic of the news, etc. So here, since we don't care about that, we can just select accept all data, then delete this original trigger and connect everything with this new trigger. So now that you have made these changes, you can click on save, then go back to your agent and click on save again and turn it on. And now you'll be able to always stay on top of the AI game with N8N. So yes, this was it for this whole tutorial. I really hope you liked it, and if you're interested into this type of stuff, then I highly recommend you to check out my other videos and to subscribe and hit the bell because there are more videos on the way. And again, if you want access to this template from this tutorial, as well as from my past and future tutorials, then be sure to join with the early bird discounted price for the first couple of members. And if you have any questions about anything regarding the workflow or the Skool community, then just comment it below. Any feedback is welcome as well, and I'll see you in the next video.